And I'm very happy to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Jolene Van Kaap-Deeder. She works as an associate professor at the Norwegian University of Sciences and Technology. And her work is about social context, how does social context influence or foster or thwart basic psychological needs, and what effect that can have on well-being, motivation, and emotional regulation. So yesterday people were talking about we need more work on emotional regulation and SDT, and I think Jolene is going to talk about her work today. I love the title of her talk. It is, What About Positive Emotion in SDT? Jolene, the floor is yours.
Okay, it works. That's good. So indeed, thank you also for pronouncing my name correctly. That's not so easy. So indeed, I will talk about positive emotions because I feel that in general in the literature, but also within SDT, there's not so much room for positive emotions. And if we look at positive emotions, we look at them as an outcome, so as another indicator of well-being. So I want to highlight the role of positive emotions in flourishing, so in our well-being, and also introduce the concept of emotion crafting today. So I will talk about why should we actually focus on positive emotions, what are their value, then also some research on how we regulate our positive emotions, so when we are feeling positive, what can we do to strengthen that feeling. Then I will talk about proactive emotion regulation. So you've heard now quite a lot about being proactive, such as need crafting or agentic engagement. So it touches upon the role of autonomy in emotion regulation. And then most of my talk will actually focus on emotion crafting. So it's a new concept that I coined, focusing indeed on how we can strengthen in a proactive manner our positive emotions. So when we think about negative emotions, it's quite clear to see their value. For instance, when you're feeling fear, adrenaline rushes through your body, and you're either focused on fighting, for instance, or running for your life. So the value of negative emotions is often quite clear to us. But actually, when we think about positive emotions, what is it that we do when we feel positive? It is less clear. So for instance, when you're feeling happy or enthusiastic, maybe you want to shout, dance, reach out to other people, or maybe just read a book. So it can be anything. So this makes it also more complicated, but also more interesting to study actually what is the value of positive emotions. Another reason also why researchers have mostly focused on negative emotions is also because they are quite unpleasant. So we need to know how can we regulate those negative emotions to perhaps decrease this episode of negative feelings. But actually the research has shown that positive emotions are not just an indicator of well-being, but also contribute to our well-being across time. So for instance, studies have looked at mental health, showing indeed when we experience positive emotions, this is something beneficial. So for instance, the undoing hypothesis states that when we are feeling negative, then perhaps thinking about something positive can reduce these negative feelings. So for instance, this morning, I was feeling quite anxious about the presentation today. So what did I do? Yesterday, I actually planned some emotion crafting. So this morning, I engaged in meditation, and I looked up some songs, and I sang along this morning. So that was my morning to increase my positive emotions, and it indeed worked. So for me, it increased my relaxation, calmness. Still feeling nervous, but at least it's less the case because I indeed engage in emotion crafting. And for instance, also multiple studies that have shown, for instance, that when children think about a positive memory right before they take a math test, they actually perform better in that test. Also studies showing the positive effects of positive emotions on your physical health and on social functioning. So for instance, when you feel more positive, you're more inclusive towards other people, and you're also more trusting towards other people. So yeah, the research showing indeed that positive emotions are beneficial, not just by itself, but contributing to important domains of your life is quite overwhelming. And the mechanism behind this is, as proposed by the Broaden and Bill theory, is that positive emotions broaden your thinking and action. So when you're feeling positive, often you're also more wider in your perspective. So literally, for instance, people who feel positive don't just look at the screen in the middle, so in experimental designs, but they look at all pictures that are on the screen. They also see more, see more opportunities, they are more creative, they are more flexible, and all of this contributes to their well-being across time. So for instance, there are studies that have shown that when people feel positive, they are more able to problem coping, because they indeed see that this problem has multiple solutions, and I can choose between these solutions and pick the one that is right for me. So indeed, this contributes to one's well-being across time. So for instance, as an example, this study looked at the relation between positive affects and creative cognition, so indeed how creativity can help in our problem solving across 2 semesters in university students, and it showed a relation that we're more used to, like being creative is related to more positive effect later on, but also that positive effect in the first semester is related to being more creative in the second semester. Now recently I also did a study with colleagues from the Netherlands and Belgium examining autonomy support and effects in an experience sampling study. So these were adolescents reporting on their perceived parenting 5 to 6 times a day during 7 days, and also about their positive and negative effect, but here I will just focus on the positive effect findings. So in line with between-person studies, also diary studies, we found that autonomy supportive parenting is related to more positive effect 3 hours later. But we also found the other way around. So when adolescents say, I'm feeling more positive at this moment, they also rated the perceived autonomy support higher 3 hours later. So based on this research, the next question is, how can we then enhance these positive emotions? So as you know, most studies have focused on how we regulate our negative emotions, but there are also studies focusing actually on positive emotions. And these studies have looked at when we are feeling positive in this moment, how can we maintain or strengthen these positive emotions? So for instance, through savoring beliefs. So this is really about one's capabilities, one's own belief in how can I maintain my positive current emotions, such as feel fully able to appreciate good things. Also positive ruminations, or repeatedly thinking about your positive emotional state, such as think about how happy I feel. All in all, these studies have shown indeed when people engage more in such maintaining and strengthening of their current positive feelings, they also report better coping, higher optimism, life satisfaction, better health. And also reduced hopelessness and depression. So for instance, also there are studies within clinical populations showing that people who are anxious, anxiety disorder, or depression, those people also score lower on such positive emotion regulation strategies. So yeah, we know a bit about positive emotions. We know that we can regulate them in the moment. But I started to think about something else, especially in 2020. So it was a quite stressful period for me. I first worked at Ghent University in Belgium, and then in the beginning of that year, I moved to Norway. So of course, it was a new country for me, new language, new culture. But besides that, also after a few weeks, the corona hit, so we had the pandemic. This meant schools were closed. I went to work for 3 days and then had to work from home. I have 5 children, so they were also at home. So it was like chaos at a maximum level. But it did make me wonder about positive emotions, now how we can actually not just strengthen them in the moment, but also create them across time. So I went to look for literature on this topic, so proactive emotion regulation. And I found an article by Martens Klein and colleagues, wherein they apply a kind of cognitive theory of dual mechanisms of control theory. And this theory states that we have 2 modes of functioning. So we have a more preparation mode, so we prepare cognitively for future events. And we also have a more reactive mode, so in this moment we react to the current situation and regulate things. And they applied this theory on a theoretical level to emotion regulation. And they say that we can actually also distinguish between proactive and reactive emotion regulation, at the same time recognizing that most of the studies we have done have focused on this reactive emotion regulation. So you could imagine this as being stuck in traffic and you're feeling quite frustrated at that moment and you're trying to regulate this emotion. So for instance, you try to suppress your frustrations or you try to, through a process of integration, wonder why am I feeling like this, trying to open up for your emotions and then choose your actions. So that is in the moment reactive emotion regulation. But you could also in the morning wake up, already think about your route to work and know, well, it's going to be busy. I know that I will get frustrated when I'm stuck in traffic, so I'm just going to take another route to not have these feelings of frustration. So that will be more a proactive form of emotion regulation. You could also see this in a model by James Gross, so the process model, where he also outlines different strategies that take place at different time points when emotions evolve. So the most examined ones are the latter two, so cognitively changing your perspective on the situation through, for instance, reappraisal, and also the latest response that you can have is response modulation, so for instance, suppressing your emotion. But fully at the beginning of this process, you have actually situation selection. So this is about choosing the situation one will encounter based on the emotions that these situations are likely to produce. So this is in that model, although it has not been examined a lot. Most studies focus on those latter two processes. The studies that did look at it, looked at it only for negative emotions and more in experimental settings. Also, this model states that the earlier we can intervene in our emotional processes, the more effective it will be. And of course, that makes sense. If you think about emotions when they are already there, it's quite difficult to regulate them. But when you actually are not yet experiencing that emotion, but are already thinking about how you can proactively regulate that, that's more effective. And of course, linking it to SDT, where autonomy plays an important role, thinking about the need for autonomy and seeing oneself as the author of one's own behavior, but also of one's own emotions. So applying it to emotion regulation, one could proactively seek out positive emotion-inducing events. So proactive could mean prior to the event, but also really choosing to engage in this process of crafting your emotions, so a self-initiated, deliberate. So based on this, I coined the term of emotion crafting, so focusing on positive emotions and focus on proactive emotion regulation, for which I also received funding from the Research Council of Norway, together with my collaborators, Lars, Silje, Thanasis, Lenya, who is also here, and Maarten. And also together with Ada and Elena, who is also here, and I will also, she's here, sitting in the front. I will also present one of the studies that she did and did analysis for. So, emotion crafting. So first, a definition. For those of you who also went to the keynote yesterday by Maarten, you already saw need crafting, so it's quite related in terms of how we created the skill assessing emotion crafting. So it consists of awareness. So the first step is that you actually need to know what makes me feel good. So for instance, you could think about always when I'm with this friend, this person makes me feel good. And the second element is action. So proactive behavior, anticipatory, deliberate, self-initiated, aimed at strengthening positive feelings. So awareness, you know this friend makes you feel good. And then action, you actually call up this friend because you know that will likely strengthen your positive emotions. So first we started with the creation of a scale to assess emotion crafting. It was in Norway, 326 people, about 50% female. And they were all between 18 and 70, and they were representative within this age sample, and also representative in terms of their gender and location within Norway. So we had several items, a few for awareness and mostly for action. And we did exploratory and confirmatory factor analysis, and we found indeed these two factors. Here you can see the items for awareness. So for instance, I know well who I feel good around. And then for action, we also had several items, such as I seek out situations which make me feel good. And we found both these subscales to be reliable in this first study. So it was like 0.83, 0.86 for these two subscales. And then we wanted to see how emotion crafting would relate to people's positive affect as the most proximal outcome, but also in general their well-being. So first, we found that awareness, as you thought, related strongly to action, so we modeled it as an antecedent of action. You see also coefficients before and after the slash, so after the slash is when we control for other indicators of emotion regulation. So in this case, we had a cognitive emotion regulation questionnaire that you took up, and also reappraisal and also integrative emotion regulation. And also we saw that when people engage in emotion crafting action, they also report a higher level of positive affect. And this positive effect in turn related to higher levels of life satisfaction, vitality, eudaimonic well-being, and also less internalizing symptoms, so anxiety and depression. Then we wanted to replicate these findings, but in a more diverse sample. So about 250 people, mostly female, and these were mostly students from diverse countries in Europe. So again, we modeled awareness as an antecedent of action, finding a strong relation there. This time we did not assess positive effect, but we did have several outcomes. So again, we find that engaging in emotion crafting action related to more life satisfaction, self-esteem, and resilience, and again, less internalizing symptoms. Then we also did a diary study to see whether emotion crafting, if you engage in it daily, does it also relate to your well-being, ill-being at the daily level. So for this, Elina did the analysis, and it was again in Norway, where we had a baseline assessment and then 2 assessments per day, one in the morning and one in the evening for 7 days. So in these slides, you can see the interclass correlations. So for all variables, we found sufficient variability at the within-person level. So in the morning, we assessed 2 things: the planned emotion crafting. So today, I plan to seek out situations that make me feel good, and also their positive emotion goals. So how much do you want to experience this feeling today? So there was a list of positive emotions, for instance, satisfaction. And this was important to us because we wanted to show that it is not just about wanting to feel good, that is not the driving force here, but it is really about taking actions to strengthen your positive feelings. Then in the evening, we assessed our actual emotion crafting, action, and awareness. And also 4 outcomes. So we had positive effect, negative effect, vitality, and depressive symptoms. And also we wanted to see how this would compare to need satisfaction and need frustration. So all these variables were assessed with respect to that day. And then again, we also included some other forms of emotion regulation to see whether the effects of emotion crafting would be unique. So we had cognitive reappraisal, dysregulation, and expressive and experiential suppression. So first, not shown here, but we also found that planned emotion crafting in the morning related strongly to actual emotion crafting action in the evening and moderately to awareness concerning emotion crafting. So here are the analyses for the evening measures, showing that first both components of emotion crafting related to higher levels of positive effect that day, and also to lower levels of negative effect that day. And this positive effect in turn relates to more vitality, less depressive symptoms, and a reverse pattern for negative effect. And then we also found some remaining direct effects. So then we also wanted to compare it with the needs, because everybody who examines the needs knows that these are really strong predictors of our well-being. So I just wanted to see if when we enter those needs and also emotion crafting, whether emotion crafting would still be significant or not. So first, for need satisfaction, we found that it related to more positive effects, need frustration to more negative effects, but still we found some significant findings for emotion crafting. So emotion crafting, both elements related to more positive effect that day. And specifically the awareness component also related to less negative effect that day. The same kind of analysis, but then focusing on vitality and depressive symptoms. So need satisfaction, more vitality, and also less depressive symptoms, and need frustration, more depressive symptoms. But again, we also find some unique, significant effects of emotion crafting, so both components related positively to vitality and also negatively to depressive symptoms. So what can we conclude from these studies? So first, we found that emotion crafting is related to hedonic well-being, such as life satisfaction, but also to eudaimonic well-being. So, for instance, we assess purpose in life, and also to resilience. It's also related to less ill-being, in this case, anxiety and depressive symptoms. And we found this to be true at the general level, but also at the within daily level. And this was found even after we control for other forms of emotion regulation and when controlling for need satisfaction and need frustration. So all in all, these studies show that it is indeed important to also focus on proactive, positive emotion regulation, although, of course, we still want to do more studies. So one question that I have is emotion crafting beneficial across all cultures or not? So this is something that we aim to do in future studies. And of course, we want to look at the causal effects. So these are all correlational studies, and we want to do an experiment or intervention to see whether emotion crafting actually predicts more well-being and less ill-being. Yeah. So yeah, this is my last slide, and I want to also point out to you my research group, the Center on Parenting and Emotion Regulation. So that's Dennis, Gulshan, Elena, Edda, and Asma. So also Asma is presented today, and Gulshan and Dennis are presenting tomorrow, also related to this domain of parenting and emotion regulation. So you're welcome to attend those talks, and I also want to thank my group for being so supportive during all this. Thank you.